This is the Gigabyte 5070 Gaming Overclock Edition. Today we're going to see how it stacks up against other cards, how it performs, and to see whether it's worth your investment or not. As a forward, when I did the 4070 Ti versus the RX 7800 XT, you guys were very brutal in the comments saying that these cards should never be compared. Well, a lot of people said that they shouldn't be compared, and a lot of the data begged to differ. I also literally said they were the only cards that I had at the time, but maybe I didn't make that explicit enough. We only have the 4070 Ti Super to compare to. This is some mathematics that I've drawn up. It could be right, it could be wrong. But again, when we have more data, we can draw way more comparisons. We will know more comparatively as time goes by. But stay tuned, because I did hear you, I did understand what you were trying to say, and there are a couple of changes that I would like to make, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Now let's start off with the obvious that everyone's repeating. The 5070 has 4090 performance.
It makes perfect sense. 4090 performance. 4090 performance.
4090 performance.
RTS, however, reveals that the 5070 fell short, and quite a bit short in some instances. While I don't want to give any spoilers, it didn't do too badly, but in 4K gaming, it did fall short between 20 and 50% of a 4090, depending on the title that we were playing. When we compare the 5070 to other models like the 4070, 5070 Ti, 5080, and 5090, the difference becomes quite evident. The 5070 offers a modest boost in performance over the 4070, but falls quite short when it comes to the 5070 Ti or the 5080. The 5000 series launch has been marred by a lot of confusion. MSRP fluctuations, and what I mean is the price Nvidia said this was going to be
4090 performance at $549
versus what it actually is.
It makes perfect sense.
Has been not exactly consistent. Even as a reviewer, I've found monitoring this whole situation on pricing versus performance a little bit confusing, and I'm in the heat of it all the time. Steve from Gamers Nexus conducted very thorough testing on the 5070. Their test, like mine, found that the card performs very well at 1080 and 1440, but struggled at 4K. These 4K results often under 60 frames per second, but we'll get to my results in a second. Design-wise, it's pretty typical and what we've come to expect from Gigabyte in their Gaming OC edition. It does seem a little bit more aggressive and bigger than what I remember the 4070 being, but we still got the typical 3-fan design. We got very large heat sinks, nice thin blades, so I don't expect performance to be an issue. One design change that I did note is that we have the sliding mechanism over here in which we can illuminate the Gigabyte through the RGB or slide it and have the RGB naked. Then for the input outputs at the back, we got 3 DP 2.1As and 1 HDMI 2.1P. For content, what we're going to find in the box is we got the graphics card unit, the 5070. Next, we've got an adapter, which is the PCIe 5 to 2x8 pin. Your little information booklet that will have things like your warranty card, installation guide, and quick guide. And lastly, some screws, and that is for the bracket that you get with the graphics card. That is actually 4 pieces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is for the graphics card to be held so that you don't have sag. We're going to jump into my results now, where we're going to show the 1080p, the 1440p, as well as the 4K performance. I'm not going to say anything. Let's just go into the test.
Okay, let's look at the two setups. First things first, if we look at performance test 11, we have DX9, 10, 11, and 12. This was actually quite close. If we look at DX9, 361 to 362, so pretty close there. DX10, 171 to 190, edge there for the 4090. DX11, 290 to 301, edge there for the 4090, and DX12, 229 to 248, but pretty much in the ballpark. But if we move on to the total score as well as GPU compute, this is where we started to see a little bit more daylight. 37,152 on total score versus 41,031 for the 4090. And then on compute, 17,801 versus 27,110. So we have a similar result, but we're already starting to see a difference between the two cards depending on what was tested. Now onto Blender benchmark, and this is obviously for more rendering. So a higher VRAM is going to assist here. So no surprise here that the 4090 absolutely smashed. We have got 10,795 for the 1490 and 6,180 for the 5070. Now, where rubber hits the road and what everybody actually wants to see is the testing of games. First up, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora in ultra settings, noting that things like DLSS were on in order to help the artificial frame generation. Now we got 1080, 1440, and 2160, and we can see daylight between the two cards. It actually gets worse in 1440, where we had an average of 80 versus 188, favoring the 1490. So the proof of the pudding not coming through there in Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. Next, Total War Warhammer 3 in ultra settings and faring a little bit better than it did in Avatar, noting in 1440 we still had the biggest gap between the two cards. Onto Formula 1 2021, also in ultra settings, 1080 to 4K or 1080 to 2160. 1080 doing pretty good. Then in 1440, we start to see a big discrepancy between the two, and 4K is where we have our first big difference in 113 versus 218, and then on the 99th percentile, 85 versus 170. So 4K gaming not really coming in to play here for the 5070 on Formula 1. On to Far Cry 6, also in ultra settings, and this is where I'd say we had our closest results. 1080p, very negligible, the performance between the two. 1440, also negligible, slight difference there between 1440 and 1080, obviously 1080 being better for the 5070. And then lastly, 2160, not as big as a gap as we saw in Warhammer or in Avatar. So a lot better performance coming out in 4K for Far Cry 6, but still not at the 120, 144 frame mark that you want to be able to sync with your monitor to be able to enjoy smooth gameplay. So obviously not really great there for 4K for the 5070. Then on to Talos Principle 2 in Ultra. And again, all the frame generation boosts were put on like DLSS. And in 1080, we have a big difference, 92 to 140. Then a slightly better result in 1440, 64 to 106 in average frames. And then we can see the 1% was favoring the 1490 more. And this is, I believe, because of the VRAM supporting the 1490. And then lastly, a big difference in the 2160, 35 on average for the 5070 versus 63 for the 4090, and then 24 on the 1% low and 44. So overall, what we can see here is depending on the game, we can actually get good performance on the 5070. But obviously, as we scale in resolution, the 4090 comes and hits hard. And this is why it's important, which I'll cover in my conclusion, that it's all going to depend on the type of game that you play if the 5070 is actually going to make sense. Onto the 3D Mark benchmarks, we've got Time Spy Extreme, Speedway, Firestrike Extreme, and Firestrike Ultimate. Noting that in 1080 simulations, it was really good in things like Time Spy, Firestrike, but then oddly enough, Speedway, which is a 1080-ish benchmark, was a massively different result in 5,917 versus 10,919. So pause the video here and take a look at those graphs. Not bad performance by the 5070, but we can see daylight in things like Speedway, and then also start to see it in things like Firestrike Ultimate and lesser to Time Spy Extreme. Now on to the last thing, which is the stats, and the temperatures are first up. Noting that this has really got to do with the actual card, the call it OEM or the manufacturer of the card. In this case, it would be Gigabyte versus Wattage, and really good performance coming out of the 5070 in my opinion. 65 degrees on Performance Test 11, 54 in Blender, 67 in Furmark, 66 in 3D Mark Time Spy, and 66 in 3D Mark Time Spy Extreme. So really doing well there. The only thing where it's working a little bit harder is in Blender, where we can see it tops 54 versus 52. But this isn't really the best way to gauge because, again, these are different manufacturers of the card. But I do believe these are good temperatures from what I know. Then on wattage draw, we have skyscrapers for the 4090, and we have low consumption. Well, it's all relative, but low consumption coming from the 5070. So basically drawing almost half the amount of power in all benchmarks, except Blender is where it evens out a little bit. So average around 250 versus the 420 to 450 that the 4090 does. So a lot more efficient on wattage draw for the 5070. And lastly, you can go through this at your leisure, is the max frequency, noting that this is the max frequency for the GPU chiplet. So there are a lot more things that come into play, like how much it's drawing from the VRAM and so on and so forth. So you can match this to the wattage draw as well as the temperatures, but we are only speaking about an isolated chiplet's frequency. But that's it, on to the conclusion.
In conclusion, irrespective of the false narrative that we've had in marketing, this is still an upgrade on the 4070 and a better price on paper. Its performance, while not at 4090 level, is still pretty good.
It makes perfect sense.
So it actually does make sense as a purchase. I think it's just been soured by the overpromising and under-delivering from Nvidia. So my recommendation is do your research and be specific in the type of titles that you play. As an example, I've got tons of friends who want the best graphics cards, but then they always play the same games. Now, as we've seen, the performance can be negligible between the 5070 and the 4090. So you can actually get away with a lot less spend-wise and get the same performance or near the same performance depending on the title. I always like to ask myself a simple question. If I was offered the 4090 or offered the 5070 with the cash difference, what would I take? And I would take the 5070 because it can play all the titles that I enjoy playing at 1440 in good frame rates. But again, this is going to depend on what you need from the card. For those still trying to make sense of the results, it's long and it's complicated, but it all goes down to efficiency and optimization. The 4090 has much more power than the 5070, but the more optimized the game, DLAA, DLSS, and so on, the better the performance gap is going to be, or rather, the closer the performance gap is going to be. I say closer very loosely, because I personally don't feel that AI generation can be considered to be performance. Professional gamers and enthusiasts can feel the negative effects, like reacting off of a inserted versus organic frame in relation to reaction time, as well as retracting from realistic gaming simulation. It will, however, improve with time. Going forward, and this is where I'd really like your thoughts, is I want to change the style of my review because I feel that information is now a dime a dozen. There's just so many places you can get information and it tends to be misleading. So what I want to do is show you actual gaming footage with the performance and give you my opinion on how it's performing rather than just puking facts at you. In this way, we can easily determine whether this is worth a look at or not. If you found this review helpful, please don't forget to subscribe. It's one click and it really, really helps. I know people always say that, but it honestly does. Please give me your thoughts in the comment section below. Looking forward to seeing you on the next one. Cheers, guys. Goodbye.